for joining me for another edition of our Operational Reality with Rocco Million Live. I'm Rocco Million, your host. This is my group, Nonpartisans for Progress. I'm a disabled veteran trying to participate in our democracy because that's the only way democracy can even work. So today, but before I get into the economic terror of neoliberalism and the police terror of neoliberalism, I'm going to start with the duty of our federal government, the duty of our socially owned government, because we have a government for, of, and by the people. That's a socially owned government for our public purpose, to balance our economy in a sustainable way, to deliver freedom and opportunity to all. That's the job of our government. And to make sure that that's clear, we have a social contract with our government. That's called the Constitution of the United States. In the preamble of the Constitution, our socially owned government is mandated to ensure domestic tranquility. So our government is mandated to ensure happy populations, right in the preamble, the first part of the Constitution. Then Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it even goes a step further. It mandates that Congress lay the tax and pay the debts to provide for our general welfare and common defense. So to lay the tax and pay the debts is to mint and tax from thin air to provide for our general welfare and common defense. So this makes our Congress the currency issuer. All right, and what that means is Congress never needs to find dollars because it has the power to mint and tax from thin air. This is why we say Congress has the power of the purse. Everybody knows that, but people don't think it through what that actually means. Well, what it means is Article 1, Section 8 mandates that Congress mint and tax, or lay the tax and pay the debts. That's minting and taxing to provide for our general welfare and common defense. What's that about? What's the general welfare and the common defense about? Well, this is about sustainability. This is about how we make America stand the test of time. How do we make America exist in perpetuity? All right, so this means that government or Congress never needs to find dollars because it has the power to mint and tax from thin air at will to provide for our general welfare and common defense. It also means Congress must provide all the essential public services required to have a sustainable general welfare and common defense. I'm talking about essentials like a military and infrastructure, for instance. So the military for their common defense and our infrastructure for the general welfare. These are things that are necessary for a civil modern society to exist in perpetuity. So the tax is not about funding our currency issuer Congress. All right, the federal government taxes to make sure everybody needs dollars. That's it, simply. That's the primary function. Our federal government doesn't need our tax dollars to spend and operate. They tax us so that we need dollars. That makes us willing to sell goods and labor to get the dollars we need to satisfy our tax obligations and stay free. In other words, federal taxation creates unemployment so that the government can provision society as it spends, creating paid employment. This is the whole reason for a socially owned government that has the power to issue its own currency and tax in that currency. This is the reason we have a government that makes a monetary economy, so that we can directly provision all the essential real resources and public services that a civil modern society needs to exist in perpetuity. So taxes can never fund the federal government. Article 1, Section 8 makes our government self-funding. We make dollars at will from thin air. All right, it's the real resources that matter. So the taxes are not about funding our government. Taxes are about guaranteeing demand for the dollar. In other words, taxes are about creating unemployment. They put a tax on you and your house and your land. Now you need to sell your goods and labor to the government so that you could get those dollars to satisfy your tax and keep your house and stay out of jail. And so that's how the government provisions a military, for instance, or roads, or legal systems, or this and that, with paid employment as it spends. Now that's the direct economy. Now, that's how government centrally plans the essentials needed for America to exist in perpetuity. Now, for the secondary economy to develop, the capitalist economy, our federal government has to spend more dollars into existence, more dollars into the economy than it taxes back out. A federal deficit. When it runs that federal deficit, it's spending more dollars in than it's taking out. That leaves us with net savable dollars that we can use to do business amongst each other. We can hire each other with. Thus, the capitalist economy is born. All right, but still, every single job that pays in dollars is always still ultimately dependent on indefinite federal spending to maintain that paid employment. So that's how it works. And government always has to keep injecting these net dollars into the economy to keep the economy going, to keep the markets going. All right, so keep that in mind as we move on. So, but before we talk about neoliberalism, let me briefly describe the New Deal era that preceded neoliberalism. And this will again make clear that taxes do not fund federal spending. All right, because if we think about the Great Depression era, we had record inequality, we had record systemic corruption, monopolists and spectators, they crashed the entire economy. And we had 25% unemployment, and that means there was no tax revenues. Nobody had money. As they said, America was broke. We were on the gold standard. So we didn't have monetary sovereignty. And all of a sudden, through massive scale democratic struggle, the American people rose up and they forced FDR to respond to the Great Depression with the full employment policies of the New Deal. These policies aggressively deficit spent, investing in direct federal jobs, millions of direct federal jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure and crumbling nation at the time. It invested in top-notch public health care. He deficit spent investing in public education, public infrastructure, public energy. All of these investments made America the #1 superpower in the entire world, with a middle class that was the envy of the entire world. All right, if you were white, you can land a career job straight out of high school and support a whole family with a car and a house just on that one income. Because when our government stands by offering living wage work, now businesses got to beat that government job to attract a labor workforce, thus driving up our wages with our productivity. So this corresponds with the American dream. This is what created the American dream. These New Deal policies, this New Deal era, created this strong, prosperous America. But of course, the oligarchy fought back. They hated the collectivism of the New Deal. And so the moneyed interests, they took over whole economic departments. They bought the media. They changed the narrative. They got academia. And they eventually got both parties to buy into the sadistic ideology of neoliberalism by the 70s. Both parties killed the full employment policies of the New Deal. This ushered in our bipartisan neoliberal era. And this was marked by government targeting unemployment rather than full employment, as was always customary in America. So neoliberals target unemployment, and they cut and privatize our public services like healthcare, education, infrastructure, and energy. That creates starvation wage environments where the majority can't make enough dollars to get basic needs met. As a result, Americans were forced into record personal debt and or crime to make ends meet. I'm talking about credit for milk and eggs, credit for for-profit education, credit for health care, credit for transportation. This is what a starvation wage jobs look like when you can't make enough dollars to get your basic needs met. And that's the majority of Americans today. They make under $20 an hour, struggling to get basic needs met. And you got to remember, involuntary unemployment, when our government targets unemployment, that's systemic abuse. All right, that cannot be fixed with personal responsibility or education or job skills. All right, even if every single worker had the most personal responsibility and they had the most education and the most job skills, the best job skills, because our federal government, our currency issuer, targets 5% unemployment, we would still be forcing millions of people to be unemployed, and then millions more to be working poor in the starvation wage environments created by that involuntary unemployment. So it wouldn't matter. So people say, oh, quit wanting free stuff from the government, go out and get a job and work for it. Well, the problem is, we're supposed to have opportunity for all. And if government is targeting 5% unemployment, those millions of people are not able to have the opportunity of the rest of us. We're forcing that 5%, the millions of people, to be poor and unemployed and not be able to have upward mobility. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the starvation wage environments. Because again, targeting unemployment like we have from the 70s, it forces millions of people to be unemployed and so desperate that they'll work for starvation wages. So again, this drives down all of our wages, because you think about it, McDonald's, even though they're recording record profits right now, why would they give you a raise if you worked at McDonald's? They know they don't got to give you a raise because the government keeps millions of people outside unemployed and so desperate they'll do your job for cheaper than you. So this artificially suppressed our wages from the 70s. That's class war. And you throw on top of that cutting and privatizing our essential public goods like healthcare, education, infrastructure, energy, so on and so forth, you create starvation wages. All right, and that means that people cannot make enough dollars to make ends meet. So you're forcing them. Millions of people are forced into unsustainable private credit and or crime just to make ends meet. That's not how you get a civil society. That's how you get the opposite. That's the direct violation of the Constitution, which mandates that we ensure domestic tranquility and that we that our government serves the general welfare. So, that's incapable. If you're incapable of making enough dollars to live, you're forced into record credit. There's no other way about it. You think that our grandparents under the New Deal needed credit cards for milk and eggs? You think they needed credit cards for health care and education? You think they needed 27% interest on a credit card just to survive? People that are taking this credit, this is predatory lending. They don't do it because they're living beyond their means. They do it because they're trying to survive, because there's no other way. Our government is literally starving the economy of dollars as it targets unemployment, and it cuts and privatizes public services. And that creates the starvation wages that forced Americans into record private debt right now. All right, and then set up millions more in the black markets just to survive. So 1 second. Okay. And so now think about this. That's all the economic terrorism that these neoliberals have been inflicting since the 70s. Involuntary unemployment, forcing millions and millions to be unemployed and millions more to be working poor. All of these disenfranchised people now, the neoliberals and the economic terrorists, the elites, they need to figure out how to suppress all these disenfranchised people? How do we keep all these terrorized people from rising up in righteous anger against their tormentors, against their oppressors, the economic terrorists, the neoliberals? And so that's where police come in, how do you get even good police? Because when police and military, they join these organizations to be good guys, to help people, so how do you get even good people to, terrorize the poor, to suppress and oppress the most vulnerable, the disenfranchised, the people we force to be poor in our society? How do you get the police to, oppress them and suppress them and terrorize them, to keep them from rising up and revolt against the economic terrorists? Well, our government does this by starving the police departments of the needed funding to stay operational. All right, this forces cops to become hunters of revenue. Now they have quotas to fill, and when you give cops quotas, they're going to always target and terrorize the most vulnerable communities to fill those arrest quotas, because they know if they try to go to the rich and powerful area of town with these horrible jackbooted for-profit policing tactics, one phone call to the mayor and the cop loses his job. And now he's being victimized like he wants to ignore right now. He don't want to, subconsciously, these cops don't want to be in the unemployment line. They see how hard life can be. So they want job security. So they want to fill these quotas. So they go where they know they can pull the most shady shit to get those arrest quotas met. And even if the people do call the mayor, nobody cares, because these are the poor people that have no voice. They're disenfranchised, no power. So that's how our government keeps the police, suppressing and oppressing the disenfranchised, all the people that are forced to be poor in our society. People don't understand that. So neoliberalism really is class war. And when we force millions of people to be poor and desperate, civility goes out the window. All right? When you can't eat, civility goes out the window. Believe me. Life becomes cheap. Society becomes dysfunctional and callous and violent. And then diseases of despair increase. These diseases of despair are like addiction, suicide, domestic abuse, crime, violence. It's all, these are all designed and amplified. All these problems are amplified and created by the state not doing its job properly and serving the public purpose first and foremost. Instead, it's disenfranchising millions, which creates a very dysfunctional and violent society with people who are just trying to eat. You teach people to put profit over people in society from birth. You can't be surprised when they lose their humanity. All right, from kids, we see homeless people all over, while we see empty foreclosed houses right around the corner. That's teaching us, even subconsciously, that profit's more important than these homeless people. Every time we see loved ones suffering and dying of treatable, preventable diseases, that's what we're being taught, that profit is more important than human life, and things like that. And then, then you're going to inflict police terror to suppress all of these people who were denied upward mobility. And so when you treat people like enemy combatants, don't be surprised when they respond like insurgents. You take all hope away from people so that it doesn't matter how hard they work, they're not going to rise in our system. And you think that that's going to result in a civil society, you're crazy. You're not paying attention. If you want people to be good and socially responsible and empathetic and caring citizens, you got to give them opportunity. You got to give them freedom. Everybody needs this. You got to give them upward mobility. Otherwise, what's the point? So just to recap, from the 70s, both parties killed full employment in the New Deal, ushering in our neoliberal status quo. Both parties ever since have been starving our economy of dollars to target 5% unemployment. Reducing deficit spending, cutting and privatizing public services that suppressed our wages from the 70s. While our cost of living and our productivity and their corporate profits are all at record highs, government, artificially suppressed our wages from the 70s with involuntary unemployment, creating starvation wages for the majority today, which is why Americans are in record private debt or crime to survive. Both choices are unsustainable. Credit dries up, and this leads to booms and busts because we need an income. Me and you, we can't make our own dollars like the federal government can. So when we get money lent, we got to get income to pay that money back. At a certain point, the credit dries up, and you got to pay it back. So when we base our economy on credit because we're not spending the dollars needed into the economy, now you have an unsustainable economy. You're going to get booms and busts. And then government got to move back into a huge federal deficit position anyway, just to bail out the rich. So it's class war. It's artificial scarcity. Instead of all of that, we need our Congress to deficit spend enough up front to balance our economy up front with a federal job guarantee, a federally guaranteed living wage job for everyone who wants it, to rebuild our country and meet our needs with essential public services that raise everybody's standard of living. Then we wouldn't be the precarious class, dependent on predatory lending or crime just to survive. All right, you want to diminish addiction and crime, you want a civil society, give everybody opportunity, freedom, and justice for all. All right, and the federal job guarantee is not make work either. I got a few people acting like that. And just to give you an example, government would be hiring the unemployed to do needed work, that isn't getting done. We have work all over America that's not getting done for whatever reason. Maybe there's no profit in it or whatever, but it needs done, and only government is mandated to mint and tax for our general welfare. So think about it like this. Right now, I'm a disabled veteran. The government's paying me right now to not work. Okay? I have zero productivity. I contribute nothing. Okay? I'm a disabled veteran, have zero productive value, and I'm getting paid. All right? And with a federal job guarantee, first of all, I'm not even counted as unemployed, too. And there's millions of other people like me and millions of other unemployed people who are not counted as unemployed either. But believe me, the majority of Americans are suffering today. But anyway, so I have zero productive value, yet the government is paying me to not work. We're saying, wouldn't it be a lot better for our society if our government would instead pay me to, go, say, help seniors? Behind me, there's a senior citizen home for all these different seniors. As a disabled vet or not, I can go over there and sit with seniors a few hours a day, helping them live safe. And I would be being productive, contributing to my community. I would be helping people and raising their standard of living. That would create more socially responsible people when they have a purpose and they're contributing to society. They're helping people. You're raising living standards, and I would be getting a living wage, which would give me a lot more dollars to buy the products of local Newcastle businesses here in Newcastle or whatever. So this helps everybody. This makes, this would make our society much better by nurturing people instead of, disenfranchising people. So this isn't real complex stuff if you think about it, but this is how the federal job guarantee would maximize our productivity. And it ensures domestic tranquility as our Constitution mandates. So again, there's all these unemployed people right now. These are people that the private sector don't want. All right, there's a bunch of work all over America, whether you're talking about, elderly care, child care, infrastructure, green energy. There's a ton of work out there that needs done. And for our government to target unemployment is sadistic. For our government to target unemployment while America is crumbling in need of work is sadistic. That would never be in the public's interest. All right, government creates unemployment with taxation. All right, I could see how that's in the public interest because we need the provision society with paid employment. We need a military. We need roads. We need legal systems, sanitation systems. So, creating unemployment is, I understand it. There's a reason. It's for the public good. All right, but now there's no reason for that government to target unemployment, to keep 5% of all those that it made unemployed, stay unemployed. It would never be in our public purpose for government to, make 100 people unemployed, but only spend enough dollars into the economy to give 95 of them a job because we want 5% unemployment. That would never be in the public purpose because that 5%, no matter how many job skills they get, no matter what they do, they ain't going to be able to get work because there's only 95 jobs and there's 100 people available. All right, and so it's systemic abuse that forces those 5 to be poor and disenfranchised, and that makes them dangerous for the rest of us. And so we got to understand that. It's always better for our government to maximize our productive capacity, balance our economy by spending at the bottom with true full employment, a federally guaranteed living wage job program, because the bottom income distribution is the largest segment of society. The more dollars we have, the more we demand and guarantee the jobs of the skilled and educated above us. Because demand naturally bubbles up. It doesn't trickle down. You could give the rich, the so-called job creators, all the money in the world. They can make even the best products. If they can't sell their production because nobody has disposable income, then they're always going to go out of business. All right, so they're not the real job creators. In a capitalist economy, we need consumers. All right, you need your people to be able to consume, or else the economy don't work. So the real job creator is a balanced economy, and only our currency issuing federal government can balance the economy. It creates the economy as it spends, taxes, and regulates. And that's so we need to balance our economy, maximize our productive capacity by offering a federally guaranteed living wage job to everyone who wants it, so that we can rebuild our crumbling communities and meet people's needs with public services like healthcare, education, childcare, infrastructure, you name it. There's a million things that we could be doing. And just real quick, the federal job guarantee is the revolutionary progressive keystone program from which all other programs will flow. All right, because you got to understand, it's either you accept the systemic abuse of involuntary unemployment and neoliberal class war, or you advocate that government targets true full employment to balance our economy with a federally guaranteed living wage job program. There's no other choice there. So it's either you allow your government to inflict class war, and by the way, that's not small government. Some people say, oh, well, I don't like all this big government stuff. Well, all right, right now, you're advocating for our government to take an action to target 5% unemployment. All right, so that's not small government. That's not. You're still using the government. Why wouldn't you instead use the government to work for the public purpose of America, to deliver opportunity and freedom for all, like our Constitution mandates? That's not big government. Big government is a government that ignores the public and makes the 1% rich. That's big government. It's fascist government. So we gotta understand that. Is there any other things? Again, to make it clear, taxes cannot fund the federal government. All right, if you just think about it for a minute, apply logic. We've all been lied to. I know it's counterintuitive, but if you just apply logic, you will see this is the only way it could be. Taxes cannot fund the federal government because taxpayers cannot make dollars. If I try to create a dollar as a taxpayer, I'll get arrested as a counterfeiter. All right, so how can us taxpayers then fund Congress? It's impossible. Only Congress can mint and tax dollars from thin air per Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. So, taxes can't even be collected until the Congress first spends dollars into the economy. And so it's completely illogical to think taxpayers fund the federal government. It can never happen. And the simple truth is the federal government funds us taxpayers. Federal spending funds us taxpayers, who only then can pay tax or buy bonds or do whatever. All right, so it's always government spending first. Government is self-funding. That's what Article 1, Section 8 means. When it mandates Congress lay the tax and pay the debts, it's saying Congress is self-funding. Congress doesn't need to find dollars. A dollar is just a law to satisfy taxation. We can't run out of laws, so we can't run out of dollars. The only thing that can limit us is the stuff we buy with dollars. All right, so the only thing that matters is our currency issuing federal government spends the required dollars into the economy, makes the required investments into our society, into our productive capacity, to ensure that we have enough real resources created and available for any dollars in circulation to buy. That's modern money. That's MMT. And it's simple logic. All right, the dollars themselves, they're just a law. This is just something to organize labor and organize our monetary economy. The government uses these laws. They impose the tax so that you need dollars. That makes you unemployed. Now you're willing to work for the government, provisioning society, working for our general welfare or common defense. And again, that's the direct economy. That's the main purpose of our monetary economy and socially owned government, to ensure that the essential public services are delivered so that America can exist in perpetuity. Now, the secondary market, that happens when government spends more dollars into the economy than it takes back out. It runs a federal deficit. And so when the government runs a federal deficit, that means it's leaving surplus savings with us in the economy. So the government's deficit is equal to our surplus savings in the non-government. And in other words, when the government spends more dollars into the economy than it taxes out, those dollars stay in the economy with us. And now we can do business amongst each other. We can hire each other. We can, and so the capitalist economy is then born. All right, but still every job in every market is still ultimately always dependent on our federal government for indefinite spending to maintain that paid employment, for indefinite regulations and indefinite taxes to maintain the economy, to maintain the markets. All right, when neoliberalism privatizes our public space, it subverts our public good. It stops those public investments into our productive capacity. That hollows out our productive capacity. So when you're cutting, education, you're cutting healthcare, you're cutting infrastructure and energy, and you're privatizing it, they all become for-profit operations. And now these operations, they're for-profit, they're utterly incapable of meeting the needs of the public. And so you hollow out your reproductive capacity. You end up with populations of stupid people, populations of diseased people, populations of unproductive people. All right, again, we target 5% unemployment. That's unproductive. That means we have untapped productive capacity. Our government can instead always spend the dollars and hire all the unemployed people to maximize everybody's productivity. All right, but instead we target unemployment, and so that's artificial scarcity while millions of people suffer and die. All right, that's horrible. It's sadistic. Learn this stuff. I looked up. I watched and studied people like Dr. Stephanie Kelton, Dr. Fidel Kaboob, Ellis Winningham, Stephen Hale. The Modern Money Network, Rohan Gray. Steve Grumbine, Real Progressives, of course, Deficit Owls. There's a bunch of people out there. Start looking them up. Also, one of my favorites is Michael Hudson. I always got to give him a shout out. Read his books, the two books that I love the most. J is for Junk Economics. J is for Junk Economics, and Killing the Host. Absolutely phenomenal books. You need to read them to understand our operational reality, MMT. This is the only way we're going to get things done. All right, we have to destroy the mainstream lies and scare tactics that are keeping the public divided. The mainstream lies and scare tactics that are used to keep us all opposing federal spending on our own public purpose. So when they say, you just want free stuff, you want socialism, say something, tell them all, well, is it socialism when the federal government hires a military and we all get free protection? Is that free stuff too? No? Well, then why would it be any different when our government hires doctors and we all get free, healthy people? Why would it be any different when our government hires teachers and we get smart people for free? All right, these are all essential public goods and services needed for America to exist in perpetuity. Again, we need educated people. We need healthy people. We need, productive people with opportunity for all, so that we can have domestic tranquility. And the only way you can do that is by giving everybody who wants to work a living wage job so that they can contribute. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Any questions before I go? Oh, yeah, I'll go over a couple real quick things about what the federal job guarantee would do to revolutionize our society while we're here and talking about it. Number one, again, like I say, we have right now millions of people that are unemployed and millions more who are working poor. They're working for starvation wages. They need living wage work. All right. And America is literally crumbling in need of work. And our government is targeting 5% unemployment. All right. Forcing millions of people to be unemployed. All right. So the federal job guarantee will end that involuntary unemployment. It offers a living wage job to anybody who wants it. All right. And then it'll end the starvation wages. And this is without a minimum wage law. All right. Because just by initiating the federal job guarantee program, it's a federally guaranteed living wage job program. Now the private sector, the capitalists, they got to beat the federally guaranteed living wage job. They got to beat the working conditions and the living wage, or else they can't attract the labor workforce away from the federal job guarantee program. So it revolutionizes the private sector and it gives collective bargaining power back to labor. Again, you go back to the FDR, full employment policies of the New Deal. What was the difference? Government stood by on offer, ready to give people living wage work to do needed work in society. We had top-notch public health care, education, infrastructure, and energy. Now we don't have any of that stuff. It's the complete opposite. It's all for profit. I lost my place, but I'm talking about the federal job guarantee and how it would revolutionize our society. So when the government stood by, it made our wages go up. When the government doesn't stand by ready to give us a job, when it instead targets unemployment, it's forcing an army of people to be unemployed and so desperate they'll work for starvation wages. They're driving down everybody's wages. Your boss don't have to give you a raise because he knows there's millions of people outside that the government keeps unemployed and desperate enough to do your job cheaper than you. So that keeps our wages down artificially. It's class war. And so the federal job guarantee revolutionizes the private sector. It would force the private sector to redo their business model and truly value labor, or else they can't attract the labor workforce. It's that simple. Also, it gives the regular people leverage back. It gives everybody extreme mobility. So it fights gerrymandering, it fights local government corruption, it fights police terror, it empowers LGBT, it empowers the black community and minority communities. It does this all by giving people extreme mobility. Once the government implements the federally guaranteed living wage job program, people know, if your city, say, let's take Flint, Michigan, the city is letting police racially profile and terrorize the people. They let their infrastructure be run down to the point where people are getting sick just drinking the water. They're not working for their public. They're working for their own personal interests. Well, then the people of Flint can simply get up and leave. They can go to a town that really does care about their values, now that they know they got a federally guaranteed living wage job waiting for them wherever they go. And what that would do to the substandard city, they would lose their tax base. And because, without their tax base, they lose their ability to operate. Because local and state governments, they can't make their own dollars. They're dependent on our taxes. Only our federal government can make dollars. So the federal job guarantee, in essence, would end gerrymandering. It would force cities and states to keep their citizenry happy, or else citizens and states can, simply organize a mass exodus and leave the city unable to operate. So that would force the city to, come to the table. It gives regular people leverage and collective bargaining power. Also, the federal job guarantee would end, or at least it would end the military's employer of last resort status. I talked about this yesterday. The military has all this leverage to recruit poor people all over the world to be American terrorists and fight our for-profit wars all around the world. All right. Now, a federal job guarantee would end that. No longer would the military have all that leverage, because now, someone like me, when I was a young kid, I could have stayed home with a living wage job rebuilding Newcastle in green, sustainable ways. I would have much rather done that instead of going into the military. And so without all the bodies to fight our for-profit wars worldwide, the military-industrial complex, they would be forced to abandon its goals of empire. They would have to truly defend our rights against all enemies, foreign or domestic, from rogue nations to our domestic capitalist class. They would have to truly defend us. That would be the only way they can attract enough patriotic people to leave the federal job guarantee to instead serve our common defense in the military. All right, so it restores democracy all the way around. The federal job guarantee is synonymous with direct democracy in many ways. Also, it's an economic stabilizer. Again, this keeps, right now when the economy starts going on a downturn, people aren't buying stuff, so stores start to lay off workers and they start to decrease production because they're not selling production. So as more people get laid off, they lose their incomes and now they can't buy things. And so, the capitalists and businessmen, they start to see even more idle production. So they cut back even more, firing more people, cutting back even more. And then more people lose their incomes and it's a downward spiral to the bottom. The only way to stop that downward business spiral is for our currency issuer, Congress, to inject the currency. And right now they do that. We have these things called automatic economic stabilizers. So when people start losing their jobs, these things automatically kick in, like unemployment insurance or food stamps, welfare. These are all designed to give people a minimal amount of money so that they, even without their income, they still have money that they can go out and buy things. And that will dampen the recessionary period as well as help them. But those automatic stabilizers are only half measures. They're bad, and they amount to basically corporate welfare. We end up giving places like Walmart corporate subsidies for their workforces. They pay their workers starvation wages, and then the government comes in and has to pay their workers food stamps. And then their workers use the food stamps at Walmart again. So they're like triple dipping. The much superior economic stabilizer is the federally guaranteed living wage job program. Again, this is a counter-cyclical measure. The natural business cycle goes up and down. So you need something to counter that, to smooth it all out. That's where the federal job comes in. It's federal job guarantee comes in. It's a naturally counter-cyclical economic stabilizer. When we start to go into a recession and business starts to lay people off, the federal job guarantee program will expand. All right, and keeping those people with an income so that they can keep buying production. All right, and then when the economy starts to recover again and businesses need to start hiring again, they can hire the people right out of the federal job guarantee right back into the private sector. So the job guarantee shrinks again in economic good times. So in economic bad times, the job guarantee will expand, catching all of the people being laid off and injecting the currency back into, fight the recessionary pressures. That's how it stabilizes the economy, and it controls inflation much better than targeting 5% unemployment to force millions of people to be poor, because that's how they think that's the best way to control inflation. You keep millions of people poor, now they can't, demand goods and services, which would cause inflation. So it's sadistic and it's unneeded too. The better way to deal with inflation is always to increase supply first. All right. So if before you do anything else, austerity, taxes, anything like that, you want to increase the supply of whatever is wanted. So if you have inflation, let's say, with apples, all right, let's just say you got inflation with apples, all right, and our government's targeting 5% unemployment, keeping, a bunch of people unemployed while there's all this inflation with apples, and there's all these trees, apple trees, that need picked. No one's doing the work though, and so the supply of apples is inadequate to meet the demand for apples. So people are starting to bid the price of apples up so that they can get the apples that are there. That's called inflation. Now, government can come in, hire the unemployed people to go pick the apples on the trees and increase the supply, and that would control the inflation. And so, that's how it works. The federal job guarantee is a democratic means of production. It's capable of increasing any production that we need to ensure domestic tranquility. This gives us labor for health care, education, infrastructure, child care, all of the things that raise our standard of living. All right, and then the Green New Deal plus the federal job guarantee, they invest in all the things that raise our standard of living, and they invest in all the things that are the drivers of inflation. So anybody that says, what Rocco's talking about is going to cause inflation, we're going to ruin the dollar and this and that, you can tell them that's BS. We have MMT is the only economic school that has a working understanding of inflation and how to avoid that inflation. Again, to make this real simple, I'll do it in this way. Imagine that I move into a town. I'm the only one with really good weed. Everybody wants my weed. All right. The demand for that weed is going to be too great, and I won't have enough weed to meet all the demand. So there's a line that's forming outside my house. The people know that I don't have enough. They start to outbid each other to get what little weed I have. They bid the price of the weed up. That's called inflation. If somebody moves in next door with a supply of weed, people are gonna leave the line at my house, the crazy bidding wars at my house, and they're gonna go next door, and that's gonna relieve the inflationary pressure. So the same thing, if you want to relieve the inflationary pressure as it relates to healthcare or energy or health or education or anything, you got to invest in that productive capacity. If you want to bring down the cost of healthcare, you got to invest in the supply of healthcare. You got to increase your supply of healthcare. You want to deal with inflation and energy. You got to invest in energy. And that's a special one. That's I'm going to talk about the energy for 1 minute too, because this is another point people get mixed up. We can actually, in a free market, a real free market, fossil fuels would have been obsolete a long time ago. All right. The only reason fossil fuels are even competitive is because our federal government actively subverts green, sustainable energies with taxes and tariffs on things like solar and sustainable energy, and then they give huge direct federal subsidies to fossil fuels. And these are the only reasons that the fossil fuels are still competitive. People were worried about inflation. Energy is a big driver of inflation. After the 70s, imagine if our government started to invest in green, sustainable energy grids for America. We wouldn't be we wouldn't have to worry about if OPEC tries to mess with the supply of our oil, sending the price of oil's skyrocketing. We wouldn't have to worry about it. All right, and we can still do that today. We can start aggressively deficit spending today to build up our productive capacity as it relates to green, sustainable energy. And when we get the infrastructure built and we're producing the required electrical output that's needed, fossil fuels is gone. Naturally, they'll be gone. So all right, thank you everybody for joining me. I don't know anything else we want to talk about. Affordable housing is very important. You're right, Carrie. That's another part of the Green New Deal too. That's another driver of inflation. So it's another big area where we got to invest. There's no reason we can't be building, tons of housing. Nobody should be homeless in America. We got more foreclosed empty houses than we do homeless people. We got enough real resources in America to meet everybody's base needs multiple times over. Multiple times over. The only reason we don't is because of the greed of the 1% and our collective obedience to it. So don't tell me we don't got power. We got all the power. All right? It's not the oligarchy that is the real problem. All right? It's us collectively. We believe the mainstream lies and scare tactics designed to keep us divided and fighting against our own public purpose. So we accept fascism. So regardless, we can have the best rights, the best constitution. We can have any system of governance in the world, Marxism, anything you want. When we collectively accept fascism, that's what you're going to get every time. So it's up to us to collectively force our socially owned government to serve our public purpose first and foremost, as mandated by the Constitution. And that requires us, participating in our democracy, talking about it. What is the public purpose? Well, let's find out. Ask, think about it like I was doing today. I can see it being in the public purpose for our government to create unemployment. How else would we get people for the military and people for legal systems and people to be working on our general welfare and common defense? So that's a needed thing. That is for the public purpose, making unemployment, all right? And then paid employment to provision society. But it's not in the public interest for a government to create unemployment and then not spend the dollars required to maximize our productivity with true full employment. you know, especially when America's crumbling in need of work. That's sadistic. But we're losing tons and tons of output, tons of GDP. We're losing lives. People are dying of treatable, preventable illness. People are dying of exposure, bad nutrition. Our schooling's inadequate. Our healthcare is inadequate. Our infrastructure is crumbling. Our water is poisoned, literally, poisoned. It's just a mess. And until we start to, pay attention and focus and deal with these horrible issues, nothing's going to change. And I know, I was talking to my grandma about this, and she said the same thing. I don't want to talk about this. This is sick. Makes me sick. I don't want to think about it. And I tried to tell her, that's the point. If we don't talk about what's going on, how is it ever going to change? If you just think about it, if they were, like when Nazi Germany was dragging Jewish people out in the streets and shooting them on the spot and doing what they did. That would have, as a German person, yeah, sure, you would have been scared. You would have had to go along with the flow, or else you could have been targeted. And so if anybody would have brought up the horrible facts, maybe we shouldn't be killing these Jewish people. Maybe this is wrong. It would have caused cognitive dissonance. The Nazis would have said, I don't want to think about that. Well, this is just the way it is. We got to accept it. And so they wouldn't want to talk. And it's the same dynamic happening today, only on a much grander scale in actuality. America forces far more people to suffer and die needlessly than Nazi Germany could have ever dreamed. And that's the sick part about it. And it only happens because we collectively accept it. We don't think twice about our government targeting 5% unemployment, forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor. All right? How can you be about opportunity and freedom for all if you target unemployment, forcing millions to be unemployed and poor? Obviously, those millions don't have the opportunity and freedom that is supposed to be for all. I mean, it's that simple. And look around. We have millions of jobs all around America that America needs to function. And these jobs don't pay a living wage. So, our society depends on starvation wage work. It depends on starvation wage workers. All right, it depends on precarious workers. That's the better word. As Alan Greenspan said, when they were asking him in front of Congress what the basis for his economic success was, he said it straight out. He told us it was greater worker instability. And Noam Chomsky told us what that meant, because when you have greater worker instability, workers are, they're scared, they're precarious, they're vulnerable, so they won't speak out, they won't fight for better wages, they won't go on strike, they won't, report discriminatory work practices. They'll accept their treatment and work for their masters gladly and gleefully. That's why we do this. It's economic terrorism. It's class war. And it's getting worse and worse. And once you get to that tipping point in society where that magic number of people, once enough people feel they have no hope and there's nothing they can do to better their station in life, you're going to have revolution. You're going to have a bloody revolution. And I don't want that, because I have a small child, and I don't want that. Millions of innocent people will suffer and die. I want a political revolution like Bernie Sanders offers, with the Green New Deal and the federally guaranteed living wage job program, with a just transition, to balance our economy, rebuild America, meet our needs with public goods that raise all of our standard of living without raising taxes, without making cuts. All right. Anything else? I'm trying to think of any other scare tactics to discuss, or any other anything else, any other misconfusions. I think that's all for right now. All right, guys, thanks a lot. So, yeah, just to recap, because this got a little longer. So, first of all, our neoliberal government inflicts that economic terror. It targets that unemployment, and it creates these starvation wages, targets unemployment, privatizes public services, creating starvation wages, forcing us into record credit and or crime just to make ends meet. Now it uses the police apparatus to keep all those millions of disenfranchised people who were terrorized by, neoliberalism from rising up and getting retribution against their oppressors. So they use the police, and how do you get good people to, inflict terror on the poor? Well, first of all, the government starves the police department of dollars. They starve them of the funding that the police department needs to stay operational. So now cops got to hunt for revenue. And so that means that cops have quotas to meet. And when a cop has quotas to meet, they have to target and terrorize the most vulnerable communities to meet those arrest quotas. Because they know if they try to use these jackbooted for-profit policing tactics in the rich and influential part of town, one phone call to the mayor and that cop is out of a job, or he's working traffic. He knows he could go to the poor part of town, the ghetto, and do whatever he wants. And they could scream bloody murder, nobody's going to listen. So it's all about job security. Even if it's a good guy, they don't want to be unemployed. They don't want to get fired. So they got to find infractions, create infractions, provoke people, antagonize people. They use these things called civil asset forfeiture laws. This allows police to literally take your stuff, seize your bank accounts, take your house, take your car, without even charging you with a crime. I mean, literally, last year, police stole more assets than all crime combined. All right, so they do this to stay operational. They need to get the funds they need to stay operational. So this ensures that the police suppress all of the poor people that we force to be poor. And so that the police keep them from attacking their oppressors. And that's how our system works. That's why neoliberalism is so sadistic. Now, there even is another element to this, and that's the for-profit imperialism element. And we get in, that's a whole other can of worms. We get into these illegal proxy wars. We team up with right-wing terrorists worldwide in illegal proxy wars against democratic nations in the public purpose worldwide. And when you're talking about these terrorist groups, or terrorist proxies like in Afghanistan, the Karzai government and the warlords, and they were the drug traffickers. All right, and you think about it, the Taliban, they were against heroin and poppy production. All right, so when America wanted to go in and get rid of the Taliban, they had to team up with the Taliban's natural enemy, which were the narco traffickers and the warlords who hated the Taliban and their crazy fundamental religious nutsness. And so America teamed up with them and said, look, I'll let you grow your cash crop again. Just help us fight, tell us where they're at. And so that's why, since America had operational control of Afghanistan, heroin production in that nation has, doubled and redoubled and over every year, from there. And now we flooded all, our markets, our streets in America with really good, really cheap heroin. All right, and so then you think about, we inflict more draconian drug laws because of this, drug epidemic and the drug war. And what does that do? Basically now doctors are so scared of the DEA that they won't do their jobs. They won't treat people. So they're forcing someone like me, a disabled veteran. I've had 2 spinal surgeries. The doctor tells me straight out, I know you need painkillers. I'm too afraid of the DEA to give you what you need. So, and I told her this. I said, so then you're refusing to do your job. Your oath is your Hippocratic oath is the first do no harm, and so the police are forcing doctors to violate their Hippocratic oath and do harm, because they're forcing someone like me to get my life-saving medication from the black market with no medical oversight, no government regulations, and that's not good. That's not better for me. It's not better for society. So then it's a counterproductive law. If it doesn't help me, it doesn't help society, why is it a law? It doesn't make sense. So that actually creates this opiate epidemic, these overdoses. All right, when you flood your streets with all this really good, really cheap heroin because you're teamed up with a right-wing terrorist proxy narco trafficker in Afghanistan, and then you inflict draconian drug laws, making the doctors not treat patients. You're setting up a huge black market, and without no government oversights or medical regulations, you're going to get tons of overdoses. You're going to get more disease. You're going to get more crime. You're going to get more suicide. This isn't rocket science. And we did the same thing in the Contras. These ain't just one-off things. We did it in Vietnam. Hell, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, the CIA, they created their own airline, America Air, specifically to traffic guns and drugs illegally, to fund these proxy wars and different things. Look into Iran-Contra. This is congressional record. It's in the congressional record. We teamed up with the right-wing terrorist group, the Contras, in Latin America. And we looked the other way for multiple human rights violations, death squads, this and that. And we actually helped this group raise money by trafficking cocaine into America. And actually with Rick Ross, Freeway Rick Ross, in Ollie North, Kearney, so that's what they did. They sold cocaine. They helped the Contras sell cocaine to get money so that they can get arms for the Contras, because Congress, it didn't want anything to do with these wars, with these illegal proxy wars of ours. So our CIA and Reagan and all them, they had to do this off the books. They had to come up with this money, not by getting it through the regular channel, congressional appropriations. So that's what they did. They turned to drug smuggling. They turned to even human trafficking. They turned a blind eye to all this stuff, and that actually caused the crack epidemic in America. And what did we do? We inflicted more draconian drug law. All right, we got these huge sentencing disparities, 100 to 1 for crack cocaine to powder. If you get caught with a gram of powder cocaine or a gram of crack cocaine, you're going to get 100 times longer sentence for the crack. And that was specifically targeted at the black community in response to the crack epidemic, again, that America started because of our proxy war, our illegal right-wing proxy war in South America. So you could see how this is all counterproductive, and it has nothing to do with the public safety. We create our own problems just so that we can create fear and get people to accept and agree with even more problems, creating even more problems. So that's what it's all about. This is how neoliberalism, it's so insidious. It infects every part of our lives. That's why we always got to keep talking about it. I don't care if I sound like a broken record. I don't care if I sound stupid. The more I talk about it, the more I explain this stuff, the more I deal with opposition and arguments against me, the better I get at explaining it. And ultimately that's our goal, because we want to be able to shatter people's delusions with simple logic, because that's the easiest way to make them overcome their cognitive dissonance. That's the easiest way to unite all sides in solidarity for a public purpose, because everybody really does. Politics has nothing to do with it. when it comes to wanting your kids to have a better future, everybody, Republican, Democrat, Green, Marxist, whatever you are, everybody wants their kids to have a better future. We all want a stronger society. So once you understand what's possible, once you understand how our economy operates, once you understand the role of our federal government, you're going to unite with us, because the solutions then become evident. All right? Thanks a lot, guys.